I believe the whole dynamic of the creation is built on the Father-Son dynamic. It's actually built on the Trinitarian relationship of God. And so God created the whole universe so that he would have some people who enjoyed the Son as much as he enjoyed the Son. And so we learn something about the nature of God, that God is a father who delights in his children. And so he created the whole thing so everybody could enjoy the Son as much as he enjoys the Son. And so Adam and Eve, Adam first, of course, with Eve in him, was created as a son of God. What was the son supposed to do? Enjoy the Father, represent the Father on the earth, and his command to him was, subdue the earth with my presence, with my provision, with my protection, with my purpose. We'll do this thing together. So there's nothing better in all of life than living life conscious of your Father, his presence, his provision, his pleasure. And so God created Adam and Eve that way. And so they enjoyed God as a son enjoys a father. So they were able to relate to him because God is spirit. And they were created as physical entities, but they were aware of the spirit world. They were had a spirit dynamic to them. So they had this great privilege now of doing something really hard, which is subdue the earth. Some people, when they get into discussing grace, for instance, they start thinking that grace means being passive. God, yes, he's done everything, and so you don't do anything. Oh, no. God made us so that we could do hard things. You know, for instance, he said to Adam and Eve, subdue the earth. That's a pretty big job. And to get that done, you're going to need a relationship. You're going to need resources. You're going to need intimacy with the Father. You're going to need a team. You're going to need all that. Later on, we can talk about this later if you want to, but later on he says to Noah, build an ark. Well, what's an ark? And why do you need one? That's a big job. It took 120 years to get it done. Later said to Abraham, leave all your wealth, leave everything. Go to a place I'll tell you on the way. That's a big job. He says to Moses, bring these people out of Egypt. And it's like several million people, and how are we going to get them out of it? That's a big job. And then he says to Israel, keep my commandments. That's a big job. He says to David, conquer all the enemies. That's a big job. So it really shouldn't surprise us when we come to Jesus in the New Testament. He says things like, love your enemies, do good to those who do bad to you. Give, expect nothing in return. Don't judge, love everybody. It's like, that's a big job. And then he says things like this to us through Paul, be holy for I am holy. Oh, that's a big job. How am I going to do all of that? Well, you can do that because if you live as a son, conscious of the Father's presence, then you're also conscious of his provision, his protection, his purpose, his pleasure, all those things. Then you are able to, as a partner with God, accomplish the unbelievable. And that's exactly what sons do. They demonstrate the miraculous, fabulous nature, majestic nature of God. Adam and Eve were operating as sons. They were enjoying God. He talked to them in the cool of the day. They were having a blast, and they related to him on every level. And then, of course, the serpent comes in and offers this alternative, insinuates that God doesn't have their best interests at heart, and that they can do something to be like God, which is the big trap always. You can do something to be like God. Well, they sinned, and when they sinned, it's a fantastic thought that one moment they're enjoying God as son, and then after sin, they run and hide behind a bush because shame is now filling them. And they're hiding behind a bush, afraid of this God that a few moments earlier they were enjoying so delightfully. And so now they're back there. But the problem now is he's spirit, and they're dead now in spirit. They're cut off in spirit. So now they're in a speculative mode. They're behind the bush wondering, what does God want? I wonder what it takes to satisfy him. What's it going to take to appease him? What does it take to get back what we just lost? All religions came from behind that bush, because all religions are from men speculating what do you have to do to get back into Eden, to get back to that relationship where you are, you're living out your design, your desires, your delight, all of that is based on your design, and you're enjoying God, enjoying the work He's given you to do, and life is joy. So all religions are back there. So whatever you come up with, like, okay, what it takes to satisfy God is it takes sacrifice. So what do you sacrifice? Well, sacrifice your land. Oh, well, if you're going to sacrifice, you probably need to go to the highest level. So what's the most important thing to you? Well, my children. So child sacrifice becomes a part of many religions. And so the thing that happened in their heart the moment they sinned was, though they had been created to be sons, they were now thinking like orphans. And orphans are always thinking, what does it take to get back in? And so all of the story of history is mankind's efforts to get back in. What does it take to get back in? I had a friend a young man who lived with me for a while, who grew up in Iowa, and his mom and dad went through a terrible divorce. His mom hated his dad, and because he looked like his dad physically, she projected her anger over on him. And one of the expressions of that was she wouldn't let him sleep in the house at night. She put him in the barn. This is in Iowa, on a farm in Iowa. It gets cold. And he was 5, 6 years old. And so he said he would have to get by the heat lamps where the chickens were to survive, and she'd put his oatmeal out on the back porch where the dogs ate it. And so I said, well, tell me about that as we worked through it. What do you remember most? And he said, here's what I remember most. I woke up every morning before daylight waiting for the light to come on in the kitchen because I knew the family would be gathering there. And I just wanted to be there with the family. He said a few times I would sneak out and pull myself up to the window ledge and look in. And I would see the other children putting the plates out, setting the plates. And I always wished they'd put one out for me, but they never did. He told me that story. I thought, that's the story of humanity. It's the story of all mankind. We're always pulling ourselves up on the ledge, looking in to the Garden of Eden, looking into that presence of God, looking into that utopia, whatever we want to call it. What does it take for me to get back in? And so we're very vulnerable to people coming along and saying, do this, send money, live by this rule, live by that rule, perform here, build this church, do this ministry. Okay, whatever it takes. So orphans are really, really vulnerable to performance orientation. And it's only when we are adopted back into the family of God and we are given our sonship and we believe it, and that Abba Father spirit begins to push out that orphan spirit, that we again relate to God on the basis of sons, and then we can relate to the earth on the basis of sons, and we're not tormented. When Adam and Eve were in the presence of God, enjoying his presence, whatever, they were conscious of his love. But the moment they were behind that bush, and then as they got kicked out of the garden, of course, they were separated from God. Now, outside of his presence, you don't experience that love. So now you begin to doubt that love, particularly since the devil has already planted that seed in your mind that God doesn't really have your best interest at heart. He's holding things back. So when you're outside of a conscious presence of the Father, you start doubting the love. We were designed to be loved. And so when it's not being met, then you doubt it, and then you create a God in your own image. It says, well, he's a God, he's in charge, he's a judge, he's ruthless, but he really doesn't love me. Therefore, I've got to do something to make him love me. And that's probably the strongest impulse in any of us, and that is, we want to be loved so badly, we will do whatever somebody tells us, whatever we think is necessary, if we think it has any chance of getting that love from God back to us. In order to give dignity to man's choice and lead man through it, God has to expose in mankind this orphan mentality. So how do you expose an orphan mentality? He basically says to the question in mankind's heart, what does it take to get back in? God gives you a law. He gives you a perfect law. Hard law, but it's perfect. So through Moses, he gives this law and says, okay, here's what it takes to get back in. You have one God, you love only that God, and he has the 10 words, the 10 statements in the Torah, plus all the other stuff about it. Well, you can't argue with the law. It's the best thing ever been given as far as what's the standard, what does it take to get back in? But from the New Testament, we learn that what God was really doing was not trying to create a self-righteous people by living at the law. He was exposing mankind's heart so that he would come to the end of himself and receive the grace of God through the third Son. So the law was given to expose us. Romans 7 tells us that no matter how committed you are to live up to it, you can't, until finally you cry out, "Oh, wretched man that I am, who's going to deliver me from this body of sin and death?" And of course the answer is the Son of God. So the third Son in history is Jesus, who is a fulfillment of Adam and Eve. He's a fulfillment of Israel. He's fulfillment of the law. So he comes and shows us what son life is all about. He relates to the Father. He's conscious of the Father. He said, I don't do anything unless I see the Father doing it, or I don't say anything unless I hear the Father saying it. He never worried about provision. If he needed food to feed 5,000 families, he asked, it was there. If he needed a donkey to ride into the city for his triumphal entry, he'd tell disciples, go borrow one. They borrowed it. It was there. The guy let them have it. No paper sign, no contracts. If he needed a grave to spend a weekend in before his resurrection, it was there. Jesus never worried because he was always conscious of his sonship, of relating to the Father. And then he did the ultimate. He goes on the cross, and as Adam and as Israel, he dies on the cross and becomes the orphan, crying out to God for the first time in all of eternity. The eternal Son of God cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? He took all of our orphanity, if you'll let me use that word, on himself, and so that he could transfer all of his sonship to us. But had there not been the law, mankind would have never known that it's futile to try to get back by your own doing. Somebody had to do it for us. And there's where the gospel comes in. And only Jesus has done that. All throughout biblical history, we find that God's intention, because he loves us, and he wants us to live in that dependent relationship with him, that partnership with him. All of his assignments are bigger than we can do. All of the jobs he gives us requires that we come to the end of ourselves to discover him. Deuteronomy 8. Why did you lead us through the wilderness? Why go through all that? He said, I led you through the wilderness to humble you. I fed you with manna. And by the way, what humbles us is not being crushed. It's his doing for us what we can't do for ourselves. Manna humbled them because there are no manna seed, no manna recipes, there's no manna anything. God gives it all, you take it. But he said, the other thing I do is, I want to bring you to the place where you realize that man does not live by bread only, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. Until we are brought to the place where we're willing to believe God's word, not our own word or our own circumstances or reality as we define it, only then are we ready to enter back into that relationship of dependence, and then we become sons that express his nature and we can actually enjoy him. The law is a good thing. As Paul said in Romans 7, he said, the law is not bad. The law is very good. It's righteous and holy and good. But its purpose was not seen in the Old Testament very well. Only when Jesus came along and showed us that he could live up to the law, and that he fulfilled the law, not only by living up to it righteously, but by paying the penalty of it, that the only way we could ever be righteous was that he give us his righteousness, that he transfer his to ours, his righteousness over to us. So God is always intent on destroying that orphan mentality. Now, oftentimes we think that we go, I don't have an orphan mentality. I had a great family, great dad, great mom. I don't have an orphan mentality. But the way you define the orphan mentality is, are you still feeling like you need to do something to make yourself acceptable? Are you still feeling like there's something else that needs to be done for you to be a, quote, better person? So this better person would be worth more, loved more, accepted more significant, more secure. If you find those things in you, you're still operating on an orphan mentality. Because the son is operating on the basis of, I just want to demonstrate my father. I want to honor my father. And of course, the father's operating on, I just want to glorify my son. And the spirit is operating on, I want to glorify all that Jesus is and does, who represents the Father. So the Trinity is all about glorifying each other. And so when we get to be into that relationship, that becomes our motivation. I want to glorify the Spirit. I want to glorify the Son. I want to glorify the Father. And it's not so much about me and my appetites and what I'm doing. So God gives us the law, gives us these commands so that we trust Him. Even, as believers, we have these ridiculous commands, like Paul says, Ephesians 5. Be filled with the Spirit. Speaking, he says, psalm, hymn, spiritual song. And then he makes application. Husbands, love your wives like Christ loved the church. Wow, that's ridiculous. I can't even love my wife like my father loved my mother. I can't love my wife like Christ loved the church. And yet he doesn't give me a buy on that. He didn't give me a pass and go, oh, well, I'm sorry, Dudley. I didn't know you were so weak. I thought everybody else can, but I guess you can't, so I'll give you a pass. No, God said, Dudley, you love your wife like Christ loved the church. I have to say, Lord, okay, I'm committed to do that. Now, if I'm going to get it done, I've got to trust resources that are greater than I. I've got to trust the power of the cross, the power of the resurrection, the same Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead. I have to trust Him to give me that ability to do that. When He says, to live a clean life, live a pure life, to live a holy life, I can't do that, but I got to do that. He won't give me a pass. I've got to do it. So how am I going to do it? I have to be back in that relationship with the Father so that I'm conscious of His presence. I'm conscious of His provision. I know He's protecting me. I know that it's His pleasure that I live for. So if I don't do that, it never will get done. When you start realizing that the reason I'm doing things is because I love my Father. Instead of, I'm afraid He's going to get me. I'm afraid something bad's going to happen. I'm afraid I'm going to be cursed if I don't give the right amount of money to the right place. Instead of all of that, at least part of the motivation is, this will honor my Father. This will honor the Lord. This will honor Jesus. This will honor what He's doing, and I want to do that. And then you find yourself saying, I hope I can do this with nobody noticing. Because if I can do it with nobody noticing, it feels like it's a better gift to give to the Father. And so motives change only when the spirit of adoption is working in us, when it's really real. It's not just theoretical in my head, but it's really real that out of my spirit I am saying, God is my Father. Abba, Father. And when that is true, your motives just change. They just change. It is the presence, the consciousness of the presence of the Father. Everybody knows God is present. Well, I say everybody, but most people that are Christians would say, yeah, God's present. He's everywhere. No, I'm talking about being aware that He's present, and being aware that it's the Father who's present, not just a God or a Spirit. And it's a Father who sent His Son to die in my place who's present. It's a Father who's taken His wrath out on Jesus as my representative, so that when He is in my presence, He's not looking to spank me, correct me, punish me. He's looking to enable me, to empower me, so that I can be partners with him. Isn't it interesting, by the way, since I mentioned the Great Commission, Jesus said to the disciples just before he left, okay, I told Adam to subdue the earth, Noah to build the ark, Abraham to leave and go to Calvary, told Moses to do this, David this. Now here's your job. Go make disciples of the whole earth. And by the way, I'll be with you. It's the presence that's the issue. And mankind knows that kind of innately. That's why there's such battles over temples. That's why there's a fuss over in Israel right now about the temple. And is it a Muslim temple or is it a Christian temple? Or, we have a place to build a temple, and everybody's building temples. Well, people innately know that being in the vicinity of God is a good thing. But Jesus makes it possible for us not to just be in the vicinity of God, but to be the very temple of God, so that it makes building temples unnecessary. You don't need to build any more temples. You need to build houses where you can meet together and get your stuff done, but you don't need to build any temples. The final temple is here. So all I'm saying is that points to the fact that presence has always been a big deal, and it's a big deal today. And so I'm saying that when you know what it means to be a son, when you've come to know the Father and you are conscious of his presence, then everything changes. I mean, even on the physical realm, when I was a kid growing up, I noticed being in the presence of my Father changed my behavior. It changed the way I looked at stuff. And sometimes that was out of fear, but it was his presence. The presence thing is bigger than we have any idea. And what makes religion is trying to do the stuff without being conscious of the presence of God the Father. And because then you're speculating. Then you're wondering, what does he want? Or you're going by some rules that have been given previously, and you're doing things for God. I guess if I could define the difference in religion, in the sense of man-made religion, as opposed to the gospel, it would be this. Religion always starts off like this: if you will, then God will. The gospel goes like this: because God has, then you can. And that's the big difference, but it's a big, big difference. But today I still hear it way too much. Under the guise of preaching the gospel, I hear too much of, if you will, then God will. It's all based on you. You got to make the first move. If you will do this, if you will do this, if you will do that. Well, as long as we think we can, we're going to keep trying. And we like those books that tell us, try harder, try this, use this formula, Once you come to the end of yourself, if you tried really hard, and you come to the end of yourself, you can say, okay, now discover what God has done. Now because God has done some things, I can love him. I can be holy. I can love my wife. I can forgive those who don't deserve forgiveness. I can give. I can subdue the earth.
Steps I'm taking.